All right. Well, everybody, welcome back again to our from there to here. Had a little hiatus. I was sick for a little bit, but we are back, and I'm very excited about our guest today. Our guest is, well, let me preface by saying I love stories about people's uh altering their path, like changing careers or moving cities or whatever. I'm fascinated about the change from one status, one path to another. So, uh, our guest, Rachel Kilbert, an attorney in the Orlando area, we used to work together in the school world once upon a time, and she's now in the world of law. And there are just all kind of levels of questions that I want to ask her about that path and just other fascinating things about her life. So, with no further ado, Ms. Kilbert, welcome.
Thank you so much, Mr. Temple. It's a pleasure, and I'm always going to call you Mr. Temple moving forward because you were my assistant principal when I met you, and that's how I'll always address you moving forward.
Well, I appreciate that. It's kind of like with my former students, even though they're adults, I still see them like I did back when they were 15, so I get it. We kind of
Exactly.
stay in that phase. Well, I told the audience that you are a lawyer, an attorney. Let me do what I do with all my my guests at the beginning. I like to ask them what would be their elevator speech, which, for those who don't know the term, let's say you're in an elevator and you're only going to be in an elevator with another person 15 seconds or something. If you had to boil down who you are or what you do in those few seconds, what would be your elevator speech to tell people about Rachel Kilbert?
I should have practiced this. This is like an interview question for a job. So if you give me a job offer at the end of this, I won't be surprised.
Okay.
Um, I'm Rachel Kilbert, as you said. I would say, I'm currently an attorney. I work a personal injury attorney in Florida. I work for Dan Newman's office. Um, Previous to that, I was a teacher for many years. I think the essence of me as a person, I'm first of all a professional. I'm a mom. I try to be a friend, the best person that I can be. And ultimately, I think my goal in life is trying to bring the best out in others and just trying to change people little by little, one moment at a time.
I hear that. I already see a connection as far as your coaching life and in your current life, that theme of kind of bettering other people. And as a mom too, I see all of that.
Right.
So let's go back to little Rachel at 9. At
Okay.
9, first of all, where'd you grow up?
Grew up in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Very proud of that.
Okay.
Went to Woodland Hills School District, which was at that time maybe 11 or 12 years post forced integration in the city
Wow.
of Pittsburgh. And so it was a school district that what had existed prior to probably me being born, but just by a little bit. Many small different high schools with feeder schools that were in separate areas, separate boroughs, and at one point in time they were forced to integrate. And so the
Wow.
history of my school district was that it was very blended racially. Some were upset about that at some point. Others had no vision of that. And so as a
Wow.
child, I didn't know any different, and so to me, it was my school. I loved my school. It was, I looked at it with great pride. Outside of our district, we were looked at as like the bad school. And I didn't
Okay.
know that until I got a little bit older, and I couldn't understand why. I never could understand why. I felt that I got a fantastic education. I, I'm sure we'll get into that, but at the age of 9, my life revolved around softball. I literally woke up in the morning, played softball in the neighborhood. We had very little money. But the kids in the neighborhood amongst us, if we could find one ball and one bat, it was on. A lot of us had a glove, maybe. We'd share them, we flop them, and we would just go down to the neighborhood park and play home run derby and pick up and be active until 11 o'clock at night and come on in. So
Mm.
that was me as a person. I had a twin sister. I grew up with a twin sister, and my older brother's 8 years older than me.
Okay.
So at 9 he would have been 17. He would have been in high school, so there wasn't a lot of day-to-day playing with him because we were kind of in different age categories. But me and my twin were always together competing and fighting and pushing each other. So
Right.
literally and figuratively. So,
Right.
but yeah, so I mean, that was pretty much my life. good at any other type of sports as well. Very, very active, very tough, very tomboyish. I would play tackle football with the boys. Um, Probably had several concussions that I never was diagnosed with. Um, but loved school too, and was
Got it.
it was effortless for me to love school. Really, truly
Okay.
was. Yeah. So.
I am it kind of a side note, but I guess you would, I assume, be an advocate for kids doing something in high school, playing a sport
100%.
or doing something. I know that's one of my sermons to kids. What do you think about that?
100%. Not every person is going to play sports, right? I mean, there's a wide range of sports. I played every sport under the sun. Um, some kids might find their way in archery. Some kids might not like any sports at all. They may, but absolutely finding something that they enjoy that brings them into a social circle with people that they can grow from, that are surrounded by positive people. The teacher leaders, the student peers, everyone. And I think we'll touch on this later. I hope to touch on it later, but also providing them with experience of other people. And I think that's a very important thing that activities bring is, you're really at the mercy of who your family is when you're born.
Mm,
And without those outside experiences, you only learn what your family brings into your house. And so no matter what it is, theater, music, art, any type of extracurricular clubs, volunteering, the Humane Society, whatever it is.
yeah,
But 100% absolutely. I would 100%, if my kids didn't naturally want to do that, I would make them for sure.
got
So,
it. I, I had kind of a similar rule with my kids. They
right,
had to do, I didn't pick what it was. It was up to them, but they had to do something. They couldn't just
right.
get on the bus, come home, and that's that. We need something else.
That's right.
Got it.
That's right.
Now, now you play softball at Bethune-Cookman, is that correct?
That's correct. Yes,
How
sir.
did you how did you even know there was such thing as a Bethune-Cookman growing up in Pennsylvania, as we would say, living here in Daytona? How'd you
Well,
even know?
the short answer is that I didn't. I actually, I was a very good ball player when I was a kid. In the city of Pittsburgh, we had 3 travel teams in the entire city, which now in Orlando, there's probably hundreds. But the 3 teams were very good, and very, very good, junior Olympic gold level teams. And we traveled more than an hour to go to our practices and such and back. And ended up being at recruiting camps in Philadelphia area, and
Okay.
I had separated from my team for ethical reasons. My mom didn't like some of the things that were going on behind the scenes, and I didn't have a team. I just went to a recruiting camp and performed very well. My mom tells the story that, and I don't know how familiar you are with recruiting periods and things, but there's periods where coaches are allowed to contact parents and players, and there's periods where they cannot talk to them at all. And
Right.
they have to adhere very closely to those rules. So we're in this, we're at this camp. I'm out doing skills and things and being evaluated. My mom's sitting in the bleachers, and there's tens and 20s of coaches sitting in the bleachers around her. She didn't know that. She just was, watching me play ball like she always did. And
Mm-hmm.
they were all talking about me. Oh my God, look at that catcher. Oh my, wow, look at what was that time? All this stuff. And so eventually one of the coaches says to her, well, what school do you coach at? And she said, oh, I don't. That's my daughter. And they all got up and left. And so she was like, what did I do to offend them? But afterward, my mom said, no, it's because they're not allowed to talk to you. And she's like,
Got it.
oh. So long story short, I got a bunch of offers, letters in, and Harvard wanted me excessively. I mean, excessively. And
I heard this.
back then, you associated Ivy League schools with not the best top tier athletics, and
Right.
nobody, and sometimes I give my mom a hard time about this, but nobody said to me, Rachel, you're not going to make a life out of softball. Like, you have to make a life. There's no NFL for softball. There is pro softball now, but even those players have to do something else to make money,
Okay.
and it's not a full-time type of thing. But I just totally wrote it off. Didn't want to go to Harvard, didn't want to go to visit, didn't want anything. So I ended up committing and going to Seton Hall in New Jersey.
Ah,
Um, by that point, I had given birth to my daughter, my first daughter. And when I left, my mom kept her in Pittsburgh. And what the plan was for her to move out to New Jersey to be with me as quickly as possible. So
Okay.
a few months later, my mom did move out to South Orange, New Jersey, which is outside of New York City by 25 minutes on a train ride. So like
Okay.
close. Very nice area, very expensive to live. And the long and the short of it is that I couldn't afford to stay there. When you're a Division I athlete, you at that time you could only work 12 hours a week.
Okay.
We couldn't afford to live there and pay rent and sustain ourselves. Over the summer, after my freshman year at Seton Hall, I worked a construction job during the day with one of
Mm-hmm.
my assistant coaches who was a contractor. I mean, I'm talking about demolition, roofing,
Wow.
painting, caulking. I mean, everything you could think of. And he was great to me. I mean, paid me well, picked me up. It was great. And also worked a catering job at night. And couldn't bring in enough money. My mom was working as well. And so my sister was down here in Florida at Eckerd College, my twin,
Okay.
and she had come down straight from high school. And my mom just decided, you know what, let's go down to Florida, make a fresh start. I didn't want to go. I didn't, but my mom had done so much for me that it was like it was time for me to just trust her and okay,
Okay.
mom, if this is gonna make it easier for you, fine. Okay. So I had to make the heartbreaking call to my coach and tell him I'm sorry I can't do it anymore. And they were aware. I mean, they knew how hard it was for me, and I think they appreciated that. And we moved down to Florida in like late August, September, and I just got busy writing to all the coaches in Division I schools in the state of Florida. And so Bethune-Cookman was on that list. And I was working at Publix in the sub shop during the day. My mom was working second shift so we could be home with my daughter.
Okay.
Sits and for the fall semester, and towards maybe October, November of that semester, which would have been my sophomore year, I started getting interest from my letters, and all these coaches they were all sight unseen, and we didn't have Facebook back then. We didn't have, hey, let me hop on YouTube and see if this girl can play. Basically they had to rely on my stat line from my freshman year and a phone call to my coach. Hey, what do you think about this girl? Can
Okay.
she really play? And I had a good freshman year. I was on the Big East All Rookie team at Seton Hall, and we had went to regionals, and I mean, so I had a good year, so that was great. But I think ultimately my coach from Seton Hall had to. I never spoke with him about this, but he had to
Okay.
have given me a good reference, or it wouldn't
Mm.
have happened. But went on a visit to Cookman, drove over to Daytona. At this point, I did not even know this was an HBCU. I had no idea.
Ah.
None. Didn't know. I think at some point I had researched and found out that it was. Didn't deter me. I truthfully didn't care. I mean, it wasn't like a concern of mine. I
Mm-hmm.
was just trying to get back to college and stay in school and play my sport so I can go for free and make a life for my daughter,
Okay.
and outside of that, I didn't really care, and about any school, where it was located, who was there, anything. So I got there and the parking lot was still not paved. And I'm sure you remember it wasn't that long ago that they paved all the parking lots at Cookman. And my
Right.
mom looked at me and she's like, Rachel, do you really want to go into this visit? And I'm like, yeah, mom, I do. Come on, let's go. And so I went in and I just loved it immediately. My coach was amazing. It was the culture of everyone, the acceptance, the welcoming, vibe, and it just felt like family immediately. So and the selling feature was that they wanted me to come in January, and on a full scholarship, didn't have to worry about books, anything, expenses, nothing. Just come over here, play ball, bring your daughter. We don't care. We'll accommodate. Now my coach, you still got to be at practice. There's no excuses. I know you're a mom. I don't
Okay.
care. Show up, be on time. And that was fine because I didn't want to be different. I didn't want to be treated differently. So that was. I didn't really know until I got there, and then I think the pride of being a Wildcat grew within me as I was there, of course. So
That's all because my mother taught at Bethune for about 20
okay,
years, and
okay,
she ended her time there probably shortly before you got there. And my father graduated from Bethune, and then I grew up down the street. First of all, for those locally who'll see this will know, but for those who don't, you use the term HBCU for
yes,
Bethune-Cookman University.
right,
What does that?
right.
Because a lot of people don't know. What does those letters stand for? What's that mean?
So it means historically Black college and university. So there's a group of colleges that, I mean, I'm not going to go into the boring history, but there's a group of colleges across our country, many of them in the South and the Southeast area, that were started because once upon a time, Black Americans were not allowed to go to historically white or, predominantly white institutions as they are now, or just regular colleges. So they began because, African Americans didn't have opportunities outside of regular schools. Today, and I think this is kind of a misnomer where definitely white people are not sure. Some don't know they exist. Some think, oh, you can't go there if you're not a person of color. But that's not the case. I mean, there's
Right.
plenty of people that are white that won't go to Cookman, go to other schools, international students who are, wouldn't identify as a person of color. So the best part about it to me is just the history and the culture, where you don't really get that at a predominantly white institution.
Mm-hmm.
It's a bunch of different people who may have pride in the school, but it's not the same. It's not the same. I can't describe it. I can't. It's just not the same. So
I get that.
yeah,
Because well, one, through my experience through my parents and going to games when I was a kid and growing up on the campus and stuff, and even I would get in these discussions with my friends of color, those of us that went to large what was called a PWI, like predominantly white university, like the University of Florida where I went,
right,
versus my friends who went to Florida A&M or Bethune-Cookman's. And a lot of times it would the cultural aspect that is even hard to put into words, but you can see
correct,
what was different. And they have there's a certain fondness that some of my HBCU friends have for their school that's just
correct,
not even better or worse, but deeper. So I
right.
definitely get what you're talking
And you
about.
can
And
feel it. You can
and I want to
feel it.
come back to that phase
Sure,
of you in a
sure.
moment. Let's
Okay.
hop, and I'm in our 30 minutes, I'm hopscotching too much, but I got to do it. So you end up teaching and coaching. I know we were at Seabreeze High School here in the Daytona Beach area
That's right.
together. Can you, but I'm going to fast forward past that a little bit because I want to get to the transition to law. So
Mhm.
how long were you teaching, and what was the path that made you consider changing directions into your legal world?
Okay. So, and I'm going to try to be as quick as I can too, for time constraints purposes. I think I had taught for about 8 years. I had been at Seabreeze for about 3. We had a hiring freeze and a bunch of layoffs that year. I was unfortunately the newest PE teacher on the totem pole. So I was displaced from my job, and I was forced to look elsewhere.
Okay.
Um, which probably turned out to be a good thing, because I mean, Seabreeze was a great school. I don't know how long I would have been there, and it wouldn't have been a bad thing, for sure. I don't regret anything that I've done, because it all built my life. Um, Taught over in Pinellas County and at a middle school for a year, and then ended up in Orlando teaching in Osceola County schools. So having the experience at 2 separate high schools and a middle school. And I think I was at a Catholic school in Daytona before I left. So in between there, I was doing some elementary and things. And,
Hmm.
the one thing that remained in common to me was and this is no knock on any person. Um, I didn't feel that I could make a difference. I didn't. Um, and maybe you can in different classrooms or different circumstances. And I'm sure there are people that feel they can. I personally didn't feel that I was fulfilled at the end of the day. First of all, I'm intelligent, so being looked at as a PE teacher already was hard for me, because you're looked at like a dumb jock. Um, by no means are other PE teachers dumb jocks. I mean, there's a lot of very intelligent people who teach PE, and let me tell you something: the PE teacher certification test is not a walk in the park. I've known a lot of people who can't pass it.
Yeah.
So,
Yep. Heard that.
but I didn't like that I was viewed that way, and I just didn't feel like I could truly connect on a large scale. And I think due to a lot of bureaucracy, I found the high schools to be very cliquish with administration, and very, I'm going to go and make friends with this person, so they'll put me in a good position.
Mm.
And maybe not so much at Seabreeze, but I think after that, when I started really looking around and seeing things, and it just one day, it just like, I just don't think I can do this anymore. And honestly, I'm just like, I do not feel that I can do this for the next 40 years of my life.
Mm.
What else am I going to do? And literally, I said, you know what? I've always wanted to go to law school. Let me pick up this LSAT prep book. Bought it on Amazon. I studied for 2 weeks, and I'm talking about in the middle of the gym, when we were like on testing periods where the kids just sit in the bleachers. I would just sit at my table and take practice exams. Went and took the LSAT. Applied to 3 schools, got in all 3 of them. But
Mm.
I wanted to stay in Orlando, and I was looking for the cheapest way to go. So, and truth be told, FAMU was my first choice because it was an HBCU. And initially, I had wanted to go to practice civil rights law, and still do. I still have an interest in that quite a bit. And around the time that I made that decision was around the time that the Mike Brown shooting had happened and the Trayvon Martin killing had happened. And so these things were on the back of my mind too.
Okay.
I have this intellect, I have this view of life, I can truly make a difference on a larger scale. And that's kind of what propelled me, into applying and ultimately into FAMU and then I had got a good financial package as well. So, and there was so much, and it was very much like when I went to Cookman, as far as not knowing what an HBCU was, or any of that. When I
Mm-hmm.
went to law school, there was a lot of things I didn't even know about law school. I didn't know that you competed against your classmates for grades. So here I am, the most competitive person on the planet, sitting in orientation on day one, and they tell me it doesn't matter what grades you get on the test. All that matters is that you beat your peers. And I said, oh, this is it. This is for me. And I left my teaching behind when I went. So I mean, I had my 3 kids. I was a single mom. I left teaching, which was not a high-paying job, but a stable income nonetheless. And was able to go to law school on a full scholarship. So I lived on student loans, and I looked at in Orlando area. I looked up some firms that would offer 1L students, the first year students in the summer, some paid jobs. And there were like 3 firms that would do it. And I said, okay, to do this, I need to be number 1 so I can get a paid job over the summer and I can start building my resume, because I had a PE degree. I was concerned about my hireability post graduation because I didn't know how people would view me, And sure enough, that's what I did. I was first in my class after first semester, first in my class after second semester, won the award and the scholarship to get a high-paying job over the summer, and it kind of just skyrocketed from there. So I fell right into it, and I knew it was the right decision the first hour that I was there. So
That's wow. Now that's a big sentence right there. Okay.
Yes, absolutely.
I love that. So as we're talking to Miss Kilbert, there's a thing I like to do sometimes on the show. I call it mountain and valley, or high and low. When you think about elements of your story, either the being in law school part, the getting into Bethune in the first place, being at Bethune, anywhere, can you pick out maybe a significant low and a significant high of your story that you wouldn't mind sharing with us?
Sure. I think, my low isn't a moment in time, but probably just my childhood encapsulated. And I think that for me, the biggest struggle that I had was having never met my father.
Okay.
And that shaped me and left me with a deficit as a person that I struggled with into my 20s. And
Can I
sure.
ask you, because that's a very significant and widespread issue. At what age did you look at yourself and realize I have a deficit, or I guess that's the word, because of him not being there? Were you just always aware of that, or did it kind of hit you at some point?
So I was aware of how I felt. I was aware of how it was affecting me. I didn't figure out that that's what was causing it until I was probably in my early 20s. And then into my mid 20s. And it wasn't until I was in my late 20s that I need to tackle this issue. This needs to be dealt with in some manner, other than just through time, or it's going to affect me, even more throughout the rest of my life. And so, I think as early as high school, I had, fear of missing out on things, and feeling rejected by people very easily and things like that, where it wasn't normal, and I knew it was very extreme reactions to things like that.
Okay.
And I knew that wasn't normal because I was very intelligent, so I knew that, but I didn't know why. And that's what I learned later, probably mid 20s or late 20s. Yeah.
I wonder if you're like, I know other people who have been through something,
Mhm.
whatever that something is. They are now quickly able to look at someone else and identify that that person is going through the same thing I went through. Are you
Absolutely.
able to kind of quickly, especially with a young lady, look at her and see, I see what I walked through. I see it all over her. Are you able to do
Yes.
that?
I can see it in everyone. And I think, I have good interpersonal skills to begin with. But I think having had gone, through the experiences that I did, I see it immediately. And I saw it when I was teaching, and I used that to connect with, some of my students. And I know I started saying, but I couldn't make a difference with people. And I know I had students and athletes that I coached that
Mm.
I impacted their lives. And I believe that, a lot of them will remember me forever and things like that. But I tried to make connections that way with people. But not your students aren't always open to that kind of thing, and especially now, you've got to be careful how you tread those waters. And that environment is what made me feel like I could make a difference. So, but yes, absolutely now, and clients and friends and my friends' kids and my own children, and boys that my daughter brings home to date, and I mean everyone. So yeah, it's a good and a bad thing. Sometimes I wish I could just live my life and put the blinders on, and so
Not gonna happen, sister.
no.
I I have a friend, and his son is in his 30s now, but when he was like college age, great young man, he said something really profound to me. He said he went to whatever college. He said, Mr. Temple or Mr. Larry, when I'm there at school on the set, which is like the meeting place, courtyard, he
Sure.
said, because of things I've seen, he has two very stable parents, but he's an observer. He said, I can look at a girl across the courtyard and not talk to her, and I can tell if her father was in her life, or if she has a relationship with her father. And if I was that kind of guy, if I was a dog, like he would say, I would know how to approach her and manipulate her based on what I saw of the deficit with her, with her father
Wow.
not being there, or had one, but it wasn't good. He said, I can feel it. I can read it. And I said,
Wow.
yeah, I believe you're right.
That's scary, right?
Yeah. Because
It's
he's,
scary. And I believe, obviously there are people that are intentional about that. And I don't know that even they know that that's what they're doing. But, absolutely there are people out there that know that's what they're doing and they do it on purpose. And those are, predators in a way, even if they're not, sexual abusers or anything like that. I mean, they're predatory in relationships. And so that
yes.
can cause a lot of trauma for young women, and for themselves, truthfully.
Well, on that subject, how do you, or how have you personally addressed that need, deficit, etc.? This is something I didn't know we were going to talk about, but might be one of the most helpful things for people to hear.
Sure.
What
Sure.
do you, or did you do for yourself in that
Right.
regard?
So first of all, the feelings that I had, and I kind of went through this overwhelming period where I was in my young 20s. I just felt as, eternally not good enough. And it was awful. I mean, it was awful because here I was, and if from the outside looking in, I mean, I'm successful at everything I've done. I've been an athlete. I've been a college graduate. At that point in time, I had a master's degree. I was in a career. I had kids. My kids were successful. All of these things that were good in my life, and I always felt like I wasn't good enough. I
Mm,
just in the dating world, in my friendship relationships, in my relationship with my sister under my mom's eyes, so when I recognized those, I started by recognizing the feelings. And when I got to a place where I knew why they were being caused, I first of all did a lot of research about it. Took to the internet, as everyone does, and I went through a lot of books, reading through books with, rejection issues and attachment disorders and, things like that. I went through some counseling. Um, and, I think self love helps quite a bit. I think connecting with people who, I've got a handful of really real friends who love me and can love me in my good and my bad, and will call me out on my stuff and say,
mm,
listen, you're beating yourself up. This is ridiculous. This is how I view you.
wow.
And although that sounds, it sounds like I need someone to pump me up all the time. Everyone needs that. Everyone does. And through that time, I also figured out that I was dealing with mental health issues where I have depression. I was diagnosed with depression in that time. I knew my mom had struggled with that for years. I watched her. I watched her for a year at a time lay on the couch and not be able to do things like open the blinds or get herself her own glass of water. And, I didn't know what it was as a child, or as a teen. And then when I saw it in myself, it got to the point where, I mean, literally, I would have to sit on the couch and say to myself, okay, you're going to get up and you're going to go put a pizza in the oven for the kids. And I had to make myself do that as if it was the most monumental task on the planet. And when
Wow.
I realized that's what I was going through, I went to my doctor. I said, listen, I have depression. I know it. This is the medicine that I want because I had researched it. It was the one that had the least number of side effects. he thought I was a little weird because it's strange, to come in and say, hey, I want this medicine. But he gave it to me because it wasn't like it was a narcotic or, any type of,
Okay.
dangerous substance. And when I tell you the next morning I got up and cleaned my entire house, it was life changing. It was life changing. And so, and I've been on that medicine ever since. I function on a day-to-day basis. I'm fine. And so I am 100% certain it's a chemical imbalance. But I also think that in that chemical imbalance, you also have to feed, the mental part of it, in that the way you frame your thoughts about yourself, the way you approach your life. And a lot of that had to do with not having my father. And so, I wrote a letter to him in that time, 4 or 5 pages long, just pouring my heart out, partially angry, partially, saying, did you see me on ESPN last week when I was in college playing in the super regionals? That was me. That was your daughter, and a lot of raw emotion. And it was more for me than it was for him. I
Yeah.
sent it to him. I mailed it to where I think he lives. I don't know if he ever got it or read it. Never got a response. But it was essentially like I sent it off on a sale, as a message in a bottle, and I let it go. And it really was healing. It was very healing for me.
Wow.
And there's still times that it creeps into my mind, but it's not a pain. It's not like a loss. It's just a fact now. It's just, I never met my dad. That's it. And so, I think it's very important to first recognize what you're going through. But, if you're not able to do that, you've got to get help to do it. And that's
Yeah.
where I think I had a little bit of a step ahead because I was able to see it in myself. Whereas other people just kind of wallow in that, emotion and, depression where they don't even know what's wrong with them. And so
I think a big point that you're making is that a person can outwardly have so many things together, like career and, and whatever, the finances that come with it and all those, status or whatever, and
sure,
still at the very same time have some stuff behind the scenes that they're suffering with that other people would look on the outside and say they've got it all together. I recall in our years working in high school, when I would deal with kids who had, depression, or the girl getting mistreated by the boyfriend and just tolerating it or whatever, it would so often be the kid who outwardly every kid wished they were them. They considered,
sure,
they're attractive ones, or the star football player, or the main cheerleader, whatever. So outwardly they looked like they had it all together. And
correct,
they would be the ones more frequently dealing with some of these things.
right.
So that outward side had nothing to do with what was going on the inside.
And that's what makes people like that, because I identify with that. That's, we didn't talk about that I was pregnant in high school, and I didn't tell anyone until the day I gave birth. I literally did not tell anyone, not even my mother, because I was that child. I was the kid who had everything together. I was
Got it.
terrified of their reactions. I was terrified of disappointing my mom. I was terrified of that, and some of it was the environment and my lack of trusting that I could go to my mom. And that's a whole nother, topic. But, I was terrified of being looked at in the way that other people didn't view me. So there was like two people in me there was this person that I knew everyone saw me as, and there was this person on the inside that I just felt totally different. And then dealing with mental health issues later, when I recognized it, it's a stigma, and people talk about it all the time,
Yeah.
but even in my professional career, I would be, hesitant to tell clients and things like that about myself, because you don't want people to think you're not capable of doing your job. But when I try to explain it, it's just like being sick with an illness, that you have to manage. It's just like having a diabetes or having, some type of ongoing illness that you have to treat. It's the same thing, and as long as you're doing something to take care of yourself, you're, taking your prescribed medicines. And if you choose not to take medicines, you're doing other things to maintain your health, then there's nothing, there's nothing wrong with that. You're not a flawed person. You just have an ailment like anyone else has. So that's an important thing too. And it's more important for me to talk about it than it is to save face to my professional world.
That's big. That's
Yeah.
the sentence of the show right there. That's it. That's the
Yeah.
underlying one right there.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, and I think about a young friend I had about 5 years older than me, and when this is about the topic of medication, period, no matter what the issue was. His
Sure.
particular issue was like a bipolar situation.
Right.
And when he took his medication, he was a super sharp young businessman.
Right.
And then when he wouldn't take it, because sometimes he get in his mind that he didn't need his medicine, he would
Sure.
have these episodes. And this
Mhm.
was like 30 years ago when there was, way
Wow.
more stigma, about these kind
Sure.
of things. So
Sure.
I've seen you who have handled it properly, and then I saw him not handle it like he should to his own detriment. So I get that.
Right. Right.
Um, in this part that I have left, so I wanted to talk about. I asked you about this earlier, and you kind of brought up some here. So you attended an HBCU, right? And so your perspective of being a white professional, a white person in America, period, in an environment, an all black school environment, and in your family and all this. Can you talk a little bit about? It's so big and deep. I don't want to cheapen it by not naming it properly, but I guess your window in the world on matters of race that might be
Sure.
different from a
Sure.
person who's mainly only with people of their own color. Can you
Sure.
talk a little bit about your window, if my question makes sense?
It does. I'd be happy to. And I've had the privilege. It's a privilege for me, honestly, I told you a little bit about my background in the school that I grew up in, and just going to school in an environment where there's people of color, there's all different socioeconomic statuses and things, and then transitioning that into my college life. Ultimately, my family, because my kids are biracial, and having these experiences in general, I've been able to shape things, and also having an education degree and working in law. I basically boiled it down to this, okay? And I'll explain it as quickly as as succinctly as I can. Um, I've learned that there's really three categories, okay, when we're talking about race. The first one are, uh, outwardly racist people, right? White supremacists. No one has any hope on changing their thought process, changing their opinions, changing how they act or what they do. Okay.
Okay.
Um, then you have the other side where non people of color or white people like me on the other spectrum can be like me and try to put ourselves into the place of people of color, right? And I say try to because truth be told, I could never wake up and live your life the way that you live your life. I couldn't. But I know that, and I do the best that I can to insert myself into that world and view it in the way that with that lens. And there are people like me. There's a lot of white people that are like me, many of whom are afraid to be that way, right, outwardly.
Okay.
So in that category, there's subcategories, of course, and then the middle people are, I think, the target audience of who have hope. We have hope for them, and I call them. I don't know. I don't have a name for them, but it's white people who haven't had the experiences to shape them in the right direction, right? So I look at people who grow up in very rural communities or in states where there aren't a lot of people of color, and
Mm-hmm.
Iowa or wherever, and all they see or is now on TV. Once upon a time there weren't people of color on TV, so I mean they may see people of color on TV, but I mean, they're really at the mercy of how their parents behave, how their peers behave, how their teachers behave, the little microaggressions they may see. And I give examples like, little Sarah who's sitting in the back of her mom's car, who's 11, who, they're in a Walmart parking lot, and, a black man walks past and her mom locks the door, right? She doesn't know what happened. Mom didn't say anything to her. She didn't say, "Oh, Sarah, we have to be afraid." But Sarah picked up on that, right? And then Sarah does not have any experiences with people of color to counteract that. So she's being built, right, piece by piece, Lego by Lego, into this person
Wow.
who doesn't understand the issues that are right in front of her, not of her own fault, really, truthfully, not of her own fault. And so, in my mind, that category of people, white people, are the ones who can be shaped, who can be changed, who
Mm.
can be molded. And my idea is that you have to do that through education, and you have to do that before they're too old, that they move over into that other category where they have an awful experience where maybe someone of color was violent in their neighborhood, and now all of a sudden they've jumped into that other bucket where they're in
Wow.
the white supremacist group, where they're now actually outwardly against people of color. And so that is how I see things. But on a day-to-day basis, the way my window into issues of race is that I'm very outwardly vocal about it. I
Mm.
make people feel uncomfortable routinely. I have to be careful at work because I have clients who I cannot act that way with. As an attorney and as their advocate, that's not my place, and I can't do that. I can't cross that line with them.
Right.
But I think in every other area of my life, I do. I make people feel uncomfortable. You know, people will try to say, "Oh, I don't want to really talk about that." Let's just no. I do want to talk about it. You know, and let's get vulnerable and let's have a conversation because what you said isn't the case. You know,
Which I had to break in that when you gave the example of the car being locked when a black person walked by, I remember my own daughter was a teen, middle school age or something. We were all at a Books a Million, me, her, and my wife, and she left something in the car. She got up, she left to go get whatever out of the car. She came back in furious. So what happened? She said, I walked past someone's car and they locked the door when I walked by.
ugh,
And she was furious because she said, I don't
right,
want what's in your little nasty car. Why would
right,
you associate that with me? And she was like high
right,
school age or whatever.
or
And it wasn't the first type thing that happened to her, but that's a particular one that I'll never forget.
right. Well, and that's really what opened my eyes. Is I had an ex in college, and he was telling me a story about when he got pulled over, and it was a routine traffic stop, and he was just telling me, "Hey, this is what happened to me. You know, I got pulled over. The cop came to my window. I put my hands on the steering wheel. I asked for permission to get my wallet out of my pocket, and I'm like, why did you do that? You know, and it hit me. You know, I mean, literally, Mr. Temple, I've never been pulled over except when my children are now in the car with me, right? But prior to being a mom, I never got pulled over and ever thought anything about that ever. I mean, I'm talking about I'll empty my entire glove box onto the floor. I'll be flailing my arms around the car under my seat, looking for where did I put my registration or where did, you
Huh.
know, it was in that moment. And this is the moment where everything clicked for me because I grew up, you know, loving people of color, truthfully. And I'll never use the term that I don't see color. I hate that term. You have to see race. You have to see the injustices. You have to see the oppression. So I cannot stand when people say that. So I won't say that. But I truly loved every person of color that I met as a person. You know, I'm sure there were some that I didn't like, but it was because they were not likable people, not,
You're
you
right,
know,
right,
not for any reason. Right.
right.
But it was in that moment, I think I was about 19, and I was a student at Cookman at the time. And it shaped me, truthfully. And if I took anything away from that relationship, I took that. And from that moment on, I realized I do not know what it's like to wake up in the shoes of a person of color and walk that life. I don't, and I never will.
This is so I don't know the word for it, but when I was at the school where we worked, uh, I believe the Mike Brown story was in the news, and I was talking to a coworker who approached me. We would chit chat all the time, but we talked about these issues of race, and it showed me how we live on two different planets sometimes. Because he said he heard in a discussion about the Brown shooting that black parents would often talk to their kids about ways to interact with the police that were different than how white families talked about ways to make sure you aren't killed. And this is not to say that every officer will do this, but it was a reality conversation that had to be had. And my coworker was saying, I've never had to talk like that to my kids. Is that something that black families really have to talk to their kids about? And I said, of course. I heard that since I was 10. But it just showed, and he was sincerely asking. He wasn't trying to be, sarcastic or anything. So it just showed me
He's
that
in the middle. He's in the middle bucket, right? I mean, he's in the
100,
middle group, you know.
though
But he
interesting.
sounds like, and I'll do him one better because I don't know who this is, but it sounds like he's trying to be in the other bucket, you know, and by being aware of learning about things that he wasn't aware of, and that's fantastic. I mean, that's phenomenal.
Yeah,
And
rare.
you can't really ask for more, right? I mean, well, you can ask for people to actually speak out on behalf of people of color, and at the end of the day, that's what we ultimately need. And you know, I like the quote where people say that, you know, racism is not a person of color issue. It's not a black issue, right? It's an issue with white people. It's something wrong with us as a community that we need to fix, and we don't have the right to tell any person of color how something should feel to them, how they should be offended or shouldn't be offended, what that was supposed to mean or what it didn't mean, because that's your reality, that's every person's of color, that's their unique reality. You know, what we need to worry about is how what our issue is, you know, in our white community, and then how we can advocate for people of color.
I'm reminded of a coworker that I had at the school prior to when you and I worked together, and this was like early 2000s,
Mhm,
and he was doing his best to be in the proper bucket, but he
mhm.
was doing it in a clumsy way. I
Okay.
noticed that every time we would talk, we bump into each other in the mailroom, whatever. Every time he would talk about a famous black person. It's like, boy, that Tiger Woods is something, huh? And
Right.
that Venus, boy, she's something. And after about the fifth time, I noticed he's always bringing up famous black Bill Cosby, whoever. So I had to say to him, such and such, I appreciate what you're doing, but I can talk about everything. You don't
Right.
just have to talk to me about
Right.
Eddie
See,
Murphy
you're
or
better than
whatever.
me because I would have let him go and he would have eventually ran out. Like I don't know who else he would have started naming, famous black people he didn't know
Well,
after a
yeah,
while.
I felt I had to intervene before he ran out, and
Right.
so
Right. But no,
I
but back to your other coworker, I've had the unique situation of growing up as a white female, not ever having had that conversation with my parents, and then now raising children of color, especially my
wow,
son, 15, and having had that conversation with them as a white woman, as a white
wow,
single mom at times, to my very small children, And I have friends where, white friends who truly try to do the best thing with their kid, with their white children, who they say they don't want to tell their kids about racism at a young age. They want them to be innocent and they want them to be pure. And I said respectfully, I get it. I totally get it. You want to protect them, but I'm telling you, you cannot shelter them from this. You have to shape them as human beings, and they have to know that these things go on. And some do it, some don't. I mean, I
right.
can't control that, of course. But yeah, no, as young as my kids are all very, very smart. So I mean, they were very young when we had these conversations because I didn't go on age. I went on, intellectual capability. When could they understand what was going on? And
Uh, yeah,
and now I mean, the last time I was pulled over, my son was in the car with me, and he's biracial, but I mean, he certainly falls into the one drop rule, right? Like the outer white community looks at him as a black young man, and I mean, we did the whole thing. We both of us put our minds on the steering wheel. I put his around the dashboard. I mean, and the officer thought we were ridiculous, but I didn't care, because at the end of the day, we were going to be alive, and that's first and foremost. And it feels different when you are actually doing that to protect your son. It's
and I
something, right?
100%. I was when we get off, I'm going to call you quickly. There's a story about that. I don't want to put on here, but
Sure,
I do want to tell you because it kind of goes along with this.
sure.
I guess my last question on this, and I guess everything time wise, literally, I could talk to you for 2 hours
I know.
easily without even blinking. But
Right.
have you had? I've heard other people on the issue of race that are white and that are in the bucket that you're talking about being in sometimes get criticized not by whites but by blacks, other black people who feel like you are, I don't know, speaking from a perspective you don't have a right to, or you're speaking to us or down to us, or if you understand what I'm saying.
Sure.
Have you had those kind of experiences or conversations, or what would
Sure.
be your word to someone who was coming to you that way?
Sure. I think absolutely I have. First and foremost, I don't really pay attention to it. Um, but it is difficult. It is a difficult walk to balancing act because, I don't want to offend anyone, right? I mean, that's my whole goal is to make sure that people are not offended and to prevent other white people from being offensive. And so I do, and because I think I have decent interpersonal skills, I can pick up on what I can say and when I can say it and how to say it. But if I was to give advice to other people who may not be as good at that,
Yeah.
um, I would say that you just have to do what you believe in. And if someone is offended along the way, that's their own issue. Um, you know, I had a professor at Cookman that used to call me white girl. I mean, she called me white girl the whole year. I don't even know if she knew my name.
Wow.
And it bothered me. It bothered me because it made me feel very like I didn't belong, right? But I also liked it looking back because it gave me a window into how a person of color feels in the opposite situation, right?
Wow.
I mean,
Wow.
how else would I have that, experience? There wouldn't be any way for me to do that, right? So
Hmm.
she didn't like me. I knew it. I could tell she didn't like me. She didn't like I was there. I just let it roll off my back, because at the end of the day, I know that my importance is to kind of cross the line between the cultures and the races. And most of my work is molding white people who have a journey to go on, right? And if we can do that in our own community, at the end of the day, that the finished product will not be offensive to people of color. I mean, that's the goal. At the end of the day, if we are successful, the goal is that we will no longer be, outwardly offensive. So, and everyone's always going to have prejudices and
Yeah,
have gaffes and say things incorrectly. And, I mean, even in my message, I might say something that's offensive inadvertently. And so I'm also open to learning about how someone else would rather hear something too. I mean, if I say something incorrectly. So,
I got it. Miss Kilbert, I have enjoyed and appreciate your time. And you said
thank you
all
so
kind of
much.
jewels that when you see this back, that you only realize that you said
Yeah.
that are going to be
No,
good
I,
for
I
somebody.
truly appreciate it. I truly appreciate it. Race is the issues of race are very important to me. And, I practice personal injury law right now, but I do have ambitions to do civil rights work in the future. I
Okay.
think when I build a career foundation, that's where I see myself kind of moving into. And so it's important to me to be able to speak about these things and try to reach people. And, I mean, even if only one person sees this, I think it's an important conversation. So I really, truly appreciate you having me on.